So we are current event group 5. It's Brandon, Kaylee, Michaela, Jess, and me, Colton. And we decided to do a current event on the pollution that you can't see in the Tennessee River. So we chose this topic because, as we discussed working on this, we have a passion for clean water. Um, Rivers all across the globe are being polluted with multiple sources of pollution. And from what we've seen and heard, not too much is really being done about it. These sources of pollution range between things like industrial chemicals, raw sewage, agricultural pollution, urban and household pollution, microplastics, you name it. There's really endless sources of pollution. And we had interest in this topic because when, at least the way I saw it too, was while working on the slide, was when people think of pollution, they think of things that they physically can see, like actual bottles or glass or whatever. But digging into this project, it really made us think like, wow, most of the pollution actually is invisible. And the damage happening to our waterways is being impacted way more by invisible sources of pollution. And in specific, the Tennessee River is being hammered with these. And we were interested in discussing how bad the situation is and what exactly is being done about it.
So I can talk about this slide. So the background about this current event is the Tennessee River starts in Knoxville, flows into Alabama, and then goes back into West Tennessee, and then finally ends up in Kentucky. I believe it actually spans across 4 states, and it touches into each of them, and it has multiple tributaries, and the uses of the river are recreation, power generation, drinking water supply, which is a really big one, and it's one of the most biodiverse ecosystems in the world.
So a general overview of the pollution in the river. In 2017, a German scientist named Dr. Foth swam the entirety of the river with a sampling device on his ankle because he was also a very good athlete. And he found it was actually one of the most polluted rivers in the world that we'll go over later when we go into the microplastics section. But while it contained dangerous levels of microplastics, it also included dangerous levels of industrial chemicals, raw sewage, agricultural runoff, and urban household pollution that have just been piling up in the river year after year. While the Clean Water Act of 1972 helped stop some of the point source pollution, and a $2 million grant was given to help combat some of the non-point source pollution, it is still the 4th most polluted river in the United States, and more than half of it is not safe for recreational use that we were just talking about.
All right, so we are no stranger to industrial chemicals in Wilmington. So the industrial chemicals are so much worse in the Tennessee River. So this quote here says, according to the EPA, nearly 3 million pounds of industrial chemicals were released into Tennessee waterways in 2019. And some of the ways that this happened was from improper storage, illegal dumping in landfills, and spills in manufacturing facilities. And I wanted to touch on some of those. The Kingston coal ash spill, it was really bad. They dumped 1.1 million gallons of coal ash into Emory River, which is a tributary of Tennessee River. And this happened because the impoundment failed, and that was able to just seep into the river. And from this, 50 people died, people who cleaned it up, they all died from cancer, from toxic heavy metal exposure. And this is one of 1,400 unlined landfills that are right next to the rivers that are easily able to seep into them. Another one of those things, this one is also illegal dumping, is the 3M plant in Alabama. And 3M is a company that knew the toxicity of the PFAS and knew that it was bad for humans and fish. And they knew that since 1978, but for decades, they continued to dump the PFAS into the river without telling anyone about the bad impacts. And with that, they had to create a new plant because of all the lawsuits they got. So kind of like what Chemours is doing up in Fayetteville. And then EPA considers only 6 chemicals of a significant risk to human health. And it's 6 out of 86,000 chemicals that they find to be a significant risk to human health. And that's PCBs, asbestos, radon, lead, mercury, and formaldehyde. Now, PCBs are found in electrical equipment, and 27% of the Tennessee River contains PCBs. But the interesting part about that is PCBs were actually banned by the EPA in 1979, and there are still 27% of PCBs in the Tennessee River. And it's considered not a threat because the EPA says these are low levels of PCBs. And then corrosion inhibitors are found on coatings of pipes and metals to stop corrosion. And they're also considered quote unquote non-hazardous, but with only 6 chemicals being listed as a significant risk, do we actually think they're not hazardous? And then I'll move on to PFAS. So we are no stranger to PFAS here. We have PFAS in our drinking water, and we should not drink our drinking water until that is fixed, which it's being fixed now. But here in the Tennessee River, they have a really bad problem with PFAS, and PFAS are found in stuff like Scotchgard, Teflon, and firefighting foam. And we'll talk about more of that on the next page, but just for reference, the EPA limit for PFAS is 70 parts per trillion. And at certain places in Alabama, the highest seen are 36 to 43 parts per trillion. And just that number is causing many people to go into a whole spiel of medical issues like cancer, renal failure, and so much more. So 70 is not a good representation of what's safe and what's not. And then mercury, we'll touch on mercury in the next page as well. Okay, so PFAS, like I said before, it's a group of chemicals used to make non-stick and waterproof coatings like Teflon, Scotchgard, and firefighting foam. And PFAS can cause cancer, damage to liver, kidney functions, a compromised immune system, and reproductive health issues. And this journal article I have here from the Environmental Science Technology Journal is talking about how the Decatur, that's where the levels of the PFAS in Alabama were 36 to 43. And it's talking about the EPA saying, don't drink the water, but yet the levels aren't reaching what the EPA says is quote unquote unsafe. And then for mercury, mercury is a toxic heavy metal, and it's released by the burning of fossil fuels, mining, and land development. And mercury can affect the growth of an infant's brain, nervous system, in utero, and that can cause severe disabilities. So methylmercury is a huge concern. It's a neurotoxin that's found in the edible tissue of fish. So basically, it bioaccumulates in these fish, and from that, it biomagnifies. So a fish is going to be something in the river, whether that be food or it's just in the river and it sucks it in. It's going to ingest that, it's going to stick in the fat cells of the fish, and then when a human eats it, it goes to the human, the fat cells of the human. And that raises a huge concern for environmental public safety and health concerns.
So raw sewage, it's not the most pleasant of terms, but it is still a major source of pollution, especially in the Tennessee River from what I saw. So what happens is there's this bacteria that is known to cause diseases known as pathogens, obviously, and it's one of the leading causes of pollution in Tennessee waterways. And the way that pathogens enter the waterways is that either large rain events or septic systems that are failing can leak or overflow into groundwater, which allows human waste to enter the waterways. And through this, eutrophication can occur, which is the process where algae and bacteria can rush in to feed on this waste, causing algae blooms to explode and turn the water this greenish, mucky color. And what these blooms do is they suck up the oxygen in the water and block sunlight, which create things called dead zones where life in the water cannot survive. And in fact, they not only kill fish with these dead zones, what they also do, which really hurts, is harm the economy. There's a study that I looked at from 2008 that some researchers did in freshwaters, and they discovered that economic losses of $2.2 billion annually come from recreational water usage, waterfront properties, and other things like drinking water treatment, and all of these resulting from human-induced eutrophication. Another fact that I saw there, it doesn't really go into that study, but I just saw this and I thought it was so fascinatingly bad. 8 million gallons of raw sewage was spilled into the Tennessee River in a town in Alabama called Decatur, I think. In 2020 alone, an additional 5 million gallons spilled in just one rain event in the same town. So just one rain event, a rain that probably lasted an hour, maybe. 5 million gallons of fecal matter spilled into the Tennessee River in a day. And who's to say that that doesn't happen every time it rains? You know, and that's just one town along the river. When there's how many towns along the river in different states? It's crazy when you really start to think about it. And the government water quality testing looks for diseases and viruses like E. coli in these waterways. And if they find that, then they have to look farther, because then there's a good chance that other viruses may be present, like typhoid fever, salmonella, hepatitis A, or cholera. And these diseases combined cause about 3 to 4 million Americans to get sick annually, which this comes from, I'm sure, swimming, drinking this water, which is obviously not healthy with all of these diseases and viruses found in it.
So back to Dr. Foth and his project called TinSwim. He found that there were 16,000 microplastic particles per cubic meter of water in the Tennessee River. This makes it one of the highest microplastic concentration rivers ever recorded in the world. Local rivers in Germany that he also sampled, for example, have about 200 microplastic particles per cubic meter. So this is way over any reasonable amount. Like the mercury, these microplastics can bioaccumulate in the river fish, physically and chemically harming the gills and organs. And because it bioaccumulates, it goes all the way up to humans. And when they eat it, in addition to like the mercury and heavy metals, now they're also eating the microplastics, which is causing harm for them. Well, we've been studying plastic in the oceans for decades, and we all know about the huge plastic islands in the ocean. Plastic in rivers actually hasn't been studied nearly as much, so it's still fairly new. Because these plastics are non-biodegradable, they last in these rivers for hundreds to thousands of years, and we have no real effective way to remove them. Because of this, really our only option is to try and prevent it using water filtration and trying to stop using single plastic things like grocery bags. But as of right now, there are no EPA regulations on microplastic levels. So there's nothing that is being done to help it right now.
Another huge factor going into this is going to be our agricultural pollution. According to the EPA, nearly 1.2 billion acres of the nation's 2.3 billion acres are devoted just to agriculture. Some of the top most common crops / cattle are going to be your beef cattle, your broiler chickens, soybeans, corn, and tobacco. And I know thinking, even though the numbers look big, it really takes into consideration that over 79,000 farms are in Tennessee, covering over 10.9 billion acres, which is almost 40% of the total farmland in Tennessee, which for us, it may not seem like a lot, but when you look into how much manure and how much pesticides and how much fertilizer each person has to use to continue to grow these crops to the amount they need for the total, because for most people in Tennessee, they're farming for the money. So when it comes to farming, you have to try to produce crops at a higher rate, which causes higher uses of manure and pesticides and fertilizers. So what are some of the harmful natures of pesticides and excess nutrients? Well, pesticides to start with are used to kill or contain plant and animal life. They come in many forms, including insecticides, herbicides, biocides, and fungicides. Some of the most common, or going off of that, some of the most common excess nutrients that come from these pesticides is going to be nitrogen and phosphorus, which some people are like, well, what's the problem in this? Well, due to this excess nutrients, this can lead to eutrophication, which is the excess amount of nutrients that build up and no longer let nature take control, and algae starts to overtake the area, and this causes death to most plant and animal life that is in the area as well. So pesticides are both harmful to the environment and to humans. As we know, pesticides can lead to multiple will have multiple side effects in humans, including like stinging eyes, rashes, blisters, and even blindness in severe cases, and also have been linked to effects of the human reproductive system. And as far as excess nutrients, these also end up in a lot of our waterways due to stormwater runoff, which is something we are constantly trying to prevent. But as we know, it is an ongoing cycle. And the excess nutrients leading up into the water causes harm to humans who drink the water, as well as the aquatic life that use that, inhabits that nature.
Okay, now moving on to urban and household pollution. There is an estimated 30,000 chemicals found in household products, and many of these chemicals are not regulated by the government, and they're potentially harmful to humans and wildlife as they enter our systems. They are able to enter our waterways through toilets, sinks, washing machines, and stormwater runoff. Some common types of urban pollution include pharmaceuticals, and some examples of pharmaceuticals found in the Tennessee River include painkillers, antibiotics, medications for high blood pressure and seizures. Our bodies are not able to fully digest pharmaceuticals, so they end up in our feces, which are then flushed down our toilets. People also use toilets to dispose of their pharmaceuticals, which then end up in our waterways, including waterways from manufacturing companies and healthcare institutions. Another common type of urban pollution is household chemicals. These include our cosmetics, our preservatives, caffeine, cleaning supplies, etc. These leach into our waterways from our urine and feces, which end up in the wastewater. They also drain down our sinks, our showers. These contribute to water and air pollution by breaking down into small particles that are permanent. They cannot be cleaned up, and they enter our food chain and they just stay there. Our last one is flame retardants. These are found on home furnishings, baby toys, electronics, our cars. These leach into the environment through laundry wastewater, and they turn into small particles as well, which can be found in bird eggs, surface water, fish, which are then consumed by us, in food and drinking water, which can lead to harmful medical problems down the road. With the expansion of urbanization, there's also been an increase with the development of impervious surfaces, which are artificial structures that are impenetrable by water, which creates a greater risk of surface runoff that contain these harmful chemicals. Some policies, such as Clean Water Act in 1972, really helped reduce point source pollution. However, most of our urban pollution derives from non-point sources, which comes from our storm runoff and everything. In 2019, a bill was proposed in Tennessee to ban the sale of products containing flame retardants such as children's toys, mattresses, and upholstered furniture, which would reduce the chance of these chemicals leaching into the environment. However, this bill has not been passed yet. And then according to Lawrence Baker from the Water Environment of Cities Journal, he states that starting in the late 1990s, large U.S. cities were required to seek permits for discharging stormwater into rivers under the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System. So this started the construction of many retention ponds, rain gardens, infiltration basins, etc. So what can we do about all this? The effects of stormwater runoff can be reduced by the implementation of more pervious surfaces in urban areas, which would allow stormwater to be absorbed into the ground instead of flooding our hard surfaces and spreading the chemicals into waterways. Some previous services that could be implemented are permeable gravel for parking lots, lawns, grass lots, and vegetated roofs. Some ways we can deal with chemical waste in the home is to pick up our pet waste because it includes a lot of harmful toxins to the environment, reduce the use of fertilizer in our gardens, store and dispose of our household chemicals properly, no flushing them around the toilets, and avoid at-home car washes and try to use like a gas station for that. Some environmental conscious behaviors that we can include in our daily lives are to use alternatives to plastic items, such as using reusable water bottles and reusable grocery bags and metal straws and stuff, and avoid using those single-use plastics. Be vigilant about your water usage in the home and find ways to minimize your water footprint, such as using no drip faucets in your home, reducing your meat consumption, don't leave your water running in the house, stuff like that. Another way we can is to avoid using the toilet as a trash can to prevent unwanted materials being flushed into our waterways. This goes along with implementing pervious surfaces again around the home, plant a garden, plant some trees, shrubs, use grass in your lawn, which all absorb stormwater and prevent runoff. Finally, we can all do a little more reduce, reuse, recycle, repurpose items, donate unwanted items instead of them away to reduce waste.